Part 1. Introduction. Imagine for a moment that your mind is no longer pulled by daily worries, but is quietly opening into a deep stillness where every question stops moving and a thin stream of light touches something inside you, in the middle of all the noise of this world, in the pressure of work, in the fractures of family, in the mornings when you wake up, unsure what you are even living for. There is a small voice calling you, not urgent, not loud, but persistent like a heartbeat you cannot deny. It is not the voice of exhaustion. It is the voice of the soul asking you to remember what has been forgotten for so long. In a world where people chase success, titles, and recognition, a timeless truth still exists quietly, that life is not only about surviving, not only about trying, not only about forcing yourself forward. There is a map, a path, an opening meant for the hearts that have carried enough heaviness and know there must be something more. In that space, an image appears, not of a distant religious figure, but of a silent teacher, someone who walked through collapse, deserts, and dark nights, and left footprints for those who do not want to merely exist, but to awaken. His name is Jesus. Yet the story you are about to hear is not about doctrine. It is about an inner map written by a life rather than a scripture. His 33 years were not time. They were a code, an invisible book, carved by stillness, refusal, rising, breaking, and steps filled with inner strength. And today, in your crowded journey, that book opens again. See this image as the story of someone like you, a man named Michael, living in Ohio, who once felt life becoming a room without doors. Every morning going to work, his soul shrank a little more. Every night returning home, he felt as if he carried a heavy shadow no one could see. Until one night, sitting in his car with no lights on, no music, no words, he felt something strange. Not a solution, not a spark of hope, just a feeling that something was calling, and that moment became the beginning. The 33-step map did not arrive like lightning. It came as a quiet question. Do you truly want to find your soul again? And if at any moment in your life you have felt what Michael felt, even for a second, a sense that a door inside you is opening a little, then what comes next is for you. If you want me to write part 2, just say okay. The part 2, the call, and the first 2 gates of the journey. The first step of any awakening never arrives as light or revelation. It always appears as a quiet but uncomfortable truth that you have drifted too far from yourself without noticing. And Michael, that moment came on an ordinary morning in the company parking lot, a familiar cup of coffee in his hand, but its taste suddenly felt empty, like something without a soul. He watched people walk past each other and felt as if he was standing outside of life. A cold hollow opened in the middle of his chest. Not sadness, not fatigue, but a kind of inner dislocation that told him something was no longer right. That was step 1, the step of recognition, the unease the soul uses to knock on your door. Subtle but impossible to ignore. Anyone who has touched this call knows it is not the same as ordinary exhaustion. It is the sense that you cannot keep living the old way. A small crack in the wall of the ego, small enough that no one else sees it, but large enough to quietly redirect the path inside. In reality, many people stop at this step. They feel the distortion but get pulled back into work, responsibilities, pressure, habit. They convince themselves everything will settle, but the soul does not accept that. It is patient but never silent. For Michael, the call grew louder each night, not with words, but with the growing discomfort of trying to live the same life. This was the signal of step 2, the step of acceptance, acceptance that something is calling you out of your old life. This is the hardest step because it demands honesty. People can endure pain for a long time, but are afraid to face its root. Yet the truth of step 2 is not about dramatic action. It is the moment you stop running, the moment you tell yourself you no longer want to pretend. Michael reached that moment on a cold night, Sitting on the floor of his living room with the lights off and the dim glow of a street lamp spilling through the window, he held his head and whispered, "I do not know what I want anymore." That whisper was defeat and doorway at the same time. When a person stops resisting the soul, begins to speak. In the spiritual world, step two always appears with withdrawal. Not withdrawal from the city or the job, but from the noise in the mind. Jesus walked into the desert. Michael walked into a different kind of quiet. On a Sunday afternoon, he drove toward the outskirts, stopped by a lake, turned off his phone, and simply sat watching the still water. No goal, no expectation, no effort, only raw presence with himself. He did not know that this moment was the soul opening its first gate. In that silence, he felt something he had lost beneath the noise, the feeling that he had abandoned himself for too long. People often think awakening is learning something new. But step two reveals it is about removing defenses, removing the voices, demanding strength, removing the belief that you must have every answer. Sitting by the lake, nothing changed outside, but inside a small shift began. A faint rising from within his chest, whispering that his life had not truly begun. Step two lives inside that feeling, the sense that there is another path, the sense that even without seeing the way, you must still walk. Those who travel far on the inner road know the call never shouts. It only touches. But one touch can redirect an entire life. When Michael drove home, he had no plan, but he had something more important than a plan, a direction, a soft urging like mist, but real as a heartbeat, telling him to keep going. And that was the gate opening toward the rest of the 33 steps. Before closing this part, I want you to ask yourself something quietly. How many times have you heard that call and ignored it? And as you read this question, what do you feel shifting in your chest? And thank you for being here. Part 3, Facing the Shadow and Learning the Language of Stillness. Step 3 in the awakening journey always comes as a deep challenge, not from the outer world, but from the parts of yourself you once tried to avoid. When Michael entered this phase, he believed peace would appear right after accepting the call. But the truth was different. Peace does not arrive first. The shadow arrives first. The human mind contains rooms we rarely want to open, memories we avoid, shames we pretend to forget, hidden cravings for control or recognition, parts we see as unworthy and bury beneath roles. When the journey begins, these rise like silent waves, and the first thing every awakening soul must face is itself. One evening in his small room, Michael sat quietly when something heavy rose from within. No reason, no event, yet he felt close to losing control. His heart pounded, his breath tightened. A fierce resistance surfaced as if he were being pulled into a dialogue with the darkest part of himself. That was the moment step 3 opened. Jesus described this as the temptations in the desert, not mystical trials, but archetypes of the ego craving power, safety, and control. When the shadow speaks, it does not sound like an enemy. It sounds like an old companion wanting you to stay the same, urging you not to search, not to change, not to leave the familiar, telling you that you will lose everything. But the truth is, the shadow is not to be avoided. It is to be understood. When Michael stayed with the discomfort, he saw things he had never dared to face. The fear of abandonment from childhood, the memory of being belittled at school, the belief that he was only safe when pleasing others. These rose not to harm him, but to free him. Step 3 is never punishment. It is purification. After nights of facing the ego, a different stillness began to appear, not because Michael overcame everything, but because he began to listen, and that became step 4, learning the language of stillness. Stillness is not the absence of sound, it is the language of the soul. In the early days, Michael tried to meditate, but his mind was chaotic. He thought he failed. He did not know that the chaos itself was what needed to be seen. Then one morning in a park, he suddenly felt a strange moment. The noises of the city seemed to move to the background. Only the sound of wind touching the leaves remained. In that moment, he heard something clear as light, a knowing without words, not an answer, but a silent direction. This is the essence of step 4, understanding that truth does not come from the loud voice of the mind, but from the deeper movement of the soul. When you hear this, even for a few seconds, your life begins to shift. From here, step 5 naturally forms the practice of presence, not presence in a meditation hall, but in the simplest moments of life. Michael practiced washing dishes without drifting into thought, feeling each step as he walked from his car to his door, looking into the eyes of the person speaking instead of planning his next move. These small acts are the heart of the journey, because presence is where the soul lives. Jesus did not perform miracles to impress. He was fully present with each person, each breath, and that is why each gesture carried power. As Michael practiced presence, he saw that most of his pain did not come from events, but from the stories he created around them. Presence dissolves those stories. When the story dissolves, emotion releases. When emotion releases, the soul breathes again. And in that meeting point, Michael entered a new life. Before moving to part 4, take one moment and look honestly at this question. When your shadow rises, what do you usually do? Do you face it or distract yourself to avoid it? The answer you whisper inside will show you where you are on the journey. Thank you for listening. Part 4, the breaking of the ego and the art of learning to lose. Step 6 of the journey does not open through light. It opens through very human losses, through situations that seem random, but in truth are mirrors, showing where the ego is clinging the tightest. When Michael went deeper into awakening, he discovered something everyone who has ever woken up within knows clearly. What no longer belongs will leave on its own. Not because the world is against you, but because the soul is pulling you away from what keeps you small. One afternoon, after a meeting at work, Michael was criticized by his boss for a mistake that was not his. Normally, he would explain, defend himself, try to restore his image and protect his position. This time, he simply stood still and listened. It felt as if his whole being was watching the scene from a distance, no longer reacting like the old self. When he walked out of the room, he felt something strange, a release without bitterness. There was no need to prove he was right, no urge to be validated. Step 6 is when the need for recognition falls away like a shirt that no longer fits. From that moment, Michael began losing things he once believed he could not live without: his status, the way others saw him, the approval of his family, the roles that made him feel important. Yet each loss created a new space. And in that space, he realized he was not becoming weaker, he was becoming lighter. And lightness is the sign that the soul is guiding. True spirituality does not add weight. It removes it. It removes pretending. It removes the walls of defense. It removes the need to be loved conditionally. It removes the fear of being misunderstood. But to remove is also to crack the shell that once protected the ego. And that is when step 7 appears, the breaking of inherited identity. One evening during a family dinner, his mother asked why he seemed different, less enthusiastic. Michael smiled but did not explain. He knew he was no longer the man who tried to please everyone, no longer the obedient son, the perfect employee, or the friend who always said what sounded nice. He began to speak the truth. He began to say no to what dimmed his inner light. This made some relationships fade. Some people no longer understood him. Some thought he was going the wrong way. Some quietly stepped back. But Michael blamed no one. When you return to your true self, those who do not match the new frequency simply drift away. No villains, no betrayal, only a lack of resonance. Step 7 carries a loneliness that does not wound, but widens inner space. The wideness gives the soul room to breathe and grow. What makes people fear? This step is not the change, but the loss of roles they once depended on to feel valuable. That is why step 6 and step 7 are called the 2 doors of shedding. No one walks through without a few tears. Not tears of pain, but tears of realizing you carried too much that was never yours. Michael remembered a night sitting in his car, outside a grocery store. The light inside the car reflected his face in the window. In that reflection, he saw what he had never faced. His ego was built from the need to be loved, to be recognized, to be seen as good, to be praised for being strong, but none of those were him. They were garments the world placed on him. When he saw this clearly, he felt a deep release, not joy, but a pure and gentle lightness, because when you no longer need to play any role, you finally begin to live. But the real truth of this part is not in the losses, it is in what rises after them. When the ego releases, when the old roles no longer wrap around you, when others' approval is no longer the oxygen of your worth, something new awakens within you, a freedom that depends on no one. It is not loud. It does not come from declaring strength. It comes from the calm of no longer being defined by any label. Michael began to realize he was becoming someone different, not because he tried to change, but because the old layers were falling away. When he stopped fearing loss, he finally saw what was being given back, the truth of who he actually is. Before ending this part, take a moment to feel this question. When life takes something from you, have you ever wondered whether it was not lost but an invitation to return to what truly belongs? Think of something you once tried to hold on to, but it eventually left. And now as you remember it, what do you feel in your chest? Thank you for being here and for staying with your own journey. Part 5, touching the core wound and entering the inner desert. Step 8 of the journey is never gentle. It opens through a door most people spend their entire lives keeping shut. The door of the deepest wounds, not the big dramatic pains that happened once, but the quiet fractures that formed over years and hardened into layers of hurt we believed we had forgotten. For Michael, step 8 began on a rainy evening. While cleaning an old cabinet, he found a notebook from his teenage years. The messy handwriting described feeling excluded, feeling not good enough, feeling he had to work hard just to be loved. He thought he had outgrown these things long ago. But when he read them, a wave of emotion rose so strongly he froze as if he had met an old version of himself. The core wound never lies in the event. It lies in the story we told ourselves because of it. Stories like, I am not enough, I am not worthy, I must earn love. When step 8 opens, the soul does not call us back to suffer again, but to heal. Not to remove the past, but to return it to its true shape. Jesus wept for Lazarus, not from loss, but from perfect compassion. So when Michael allowed himself to cry in that small room, he was not becoming weaker, he was becoming whole, because no one can enter a new life without touching the pain of the old one. After the wounds were seen, the journey led him to step 9, the inner desert. Not a desert of sand, but a vast quiet within, where all the noise of the world is removed, so you must meet yourself. Michael felt silence settling over his life. Friends busy, work shifting, familiar relationships fading, nothing to lean on, nothing to cling to. The desert of the soul always begins with the feeling of being left behind. But what few know is that in the desert the soul speaks the clearest. One night, sitting in the living room with the lights off and only a soft glow from the window, he felt everything in his life drifting far away. There was no panic, only a spacious emptiness. This is the desert of a soul, transforming. In this step, the mind asks, where am I going? But the soul whispers, stay here. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert not to endure, but to shed every call of the ego for power, safety, and control. Anyone who enters the inner desert must pass through the same state, losing direction, losing motivation, losing certainty. But this loss is cleansing. When Michael accepted this silence, he realized he was not being abandoned, he was being emptied. And emptiness is the condition for being filled with what truly belongs to you. In the desert, every illusion of the ego falls away. People stop performing, stop resisting, stop saying the right lines, stop trying to be worthy. And at the deepest point of the desert, step 10 appears. Faith becomes living trust, not belief learned from books, not prayers spoken as ritual, but a knowing without explanation that even without certainty we are still guided. One evening, driving home after an exhausting day, Michael felt something different. He was no longer trying to control the future. no longer asking if he was doing the right thing, no longer scrambling for safety. Instead, he felt a light release, as if a current was flowing through his life, and his task was not to paddle, but to allow. When faith becomes living, trust, a person begins walking without needing to see the path, like Jesus walking on water, not to display a miracle, but to show that when fear dissolves, the impossible becomes natural. Step 10 is not an act of bravery. It is a state of surrender in which the soul leads, instead of the ego. In this state, the events of life become lighter. The things that once worried Michael no longer held power. The things he did not understand became less frightening. Faith is not believing everything will be good. Faith is knowing that whatever happens, you will still be led in the right direction. These three gates, touching the wound, entering the desert, and learning to trust, are essential for anyone wanting to move deeply into the 33 steps. No one can skip them, no one can take a shortcut, but whoever passes through them is changed forever. Before we move to part 6, take a moment to look within. Are you carrying a wound that you know needs to be seen, but you keep avoiding? And if you let it speak this time, what is the first thing you hear inside? Thank you for having the courage to stay. Part 6, wisdom that cannot be taught, and the quiet language of spirit. Step 11 always opens at the moment a seeker believes there is nothing left to learn, no strength left to continue, no answer that can come from the outside world, and it is exactly in that moment that something deeper begins to speak. After days of facing his shadows, crossing the desert, and releasing fear, Michael noticed something he had never paid attention to before. Silence has its own sound. One morning he sat in a small cafe near his home, a place that was usually crowded and loud, but that day, beneath the voices, the machines, and the traffic, he heard something completely different. Not a sound, but a clarity, a brightness that did not come from thinking, but from a very deep place inside. This was the doorway to step 11. Realizing that true wisdom is not learned from books or advice. It is not transmitted through ordinary language. It can only be received in stillness. Jesus did not teach to win arguments. He spoke in stories, images, and metaphors because he knew true wisdom does not come from knowledge, but from inner opening. And as Michael sat in that cafe, he suddenly understood something simple. I do not need to know everything to continue. He did not know why. He had no logic or evidence to support it, but the understanding was clearer than any conclusion he had ever forced on himself. This is the nature of step 11. Truth arrives not when we try to understand, but when we stop trying. From that moment, step 12 began to reveal itself, the language of spirit, not a language of words, but of signs, synchronicities, unexpected meetings, small sentences arriving at the right moment, dreams that cannot be ignored. One afternoon, while wrestling with the question of whether to leave his job, Michael walked around his neighborhood. At a corner, he saw a small sign in front of a new shop with two simple words, "Begin again." Nothing dramatic, yet it felt like a soft hand pressing gently on his heart, a reminder he had been waiting for. Not because the sign was special, but because it appeared at the moment he released control. This is how step 12 always works. When the mind stops forcing, the soul begins to communicate through the world. These signs never shout, they whisper. Our task is not to decode everything, but to learn to notice when spirit is knocking. And when Michael opened himself to this way of communication, he discovered something beautiful. Truth does not arrive like lightning. It arrives like small waves aligning themselves one after another. A friend says something identical to what he wrote in his journal. A song appears exactly when he feels lost. An invitation leads him where he needs to be rather than where he planned. These are the patterns of step 12. On that foundation, step 13 appeared, silence becoming the teacher. Not silence used to hide, but silence that reveals. Each night before sleep, Michael sat quietly for 5 minutes, not meditating for technique, not trying to hold a state, simply sitting and breathing. At first the mind raced, but weeks later he felt something deep inside, beginning to trust this stillness. In that space, the things that once confused him began to arrange themselves. Old questions dissolved, worries became clearer, decisions became lighter. Jesus often left the crowds to go up the mountain alone, not to avoid people, but to realign his connection with Source. Silence did not make him stronger. Silence helped him remember who he was. Step 13 did the same for Michael. He no longer saw silence as an empty space. It became the place where he was renewed. In those quiet moments, his soul rose like a soft light, and he understood that the deepest wisdom does not come from effort, but from allowing. Before closing this part, take a moment to ask yourself honestly, are you giving your life enough silence to hear what you truly need to hear? And if right now your mind softened even for a few seconds, what do you feel your soul is trying to say to you? Thank you for listening with your heart. Part 7. Oneness and the Sacred Flow. Step 14 always arrives as a shift in perception, not through effort, but through a quiet movement from deep within. As Michael entered this phase, he stopped seeing others through the lens of judgment. The first thing he noticed was that everyone carried the same fears he carried, each hiding them in different ways. A difficult co-worker was simply desperate for approval. A friend who avoided everything was terrified of being hurt again. A family member who spoke harshly had never been taught how to love. One morning, while standing in line at the grocery store, Michael saw an elderly man drop his bag of groceries. No one noticed. No one stopped. Michael bent down to help, and the man looked at him with a simple gratitude that made something inside Michael tremble, a strange feeling without a name, as if behind that wrinkled face was something familiar, as if he was helping himself. This is the nature of Step 14, the vision of oneness, not as philosophy, but as direct experience. Others are not separate from us. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. But in this step, Michael realized it was not a moral command. It was a description of what becomes true when consciousness opens. We stop seeing two. We see one. In that seeing, judgments loosen, blame dissolves. Every word and action from others is understood at a deeper level as the result of unhealed wounds. This understanding does not make you weaker, it makes you free. Free with others and free with yourself. But Step 14 is only a doorway. Once it opens, Step 15 begins to infuse the seeker's life, dissolving into the sacred flow. Interestingly, Michael did not force any major changes during this period, yet many things reorganized themselves without warning. A project he had clung to but no longer loved suddenly fell through. A new opportunity appeared the moment he stopped searching. Small, unexpected meetings brought surprising meaning, as if life was moving him rather than him pushing himself forward. One afternoon, while driving along a familiar road, Michael felt something settle deeply inside him. Everything that had ever happened, both joy and pain, had led him to this moment. Suddenly, all the events that once broke him made sense. The relationships that ended, the failures that drained him, the nights he thought his life was over, they all fit together like puzzle pieces, finally locking into place. He laughed softly, not because he understood everything, but because for the first time he no longer needed to. This is the essence of Step 15, living in the sacred flow, instead of forcing life to obey the mind. Jesus said, I am in the Father and the Father in me. In this step, those words are no longer scripture. They become lived reality. As Michael released control, he saw that life had never been against him. Only the ego resisted life. When the ego softened, the current of the soul began to lead. No need for perfect plans, no need to know the future, no need to hold on too tightly. Those who pass through this stage all describe the same sensation. Everything becomes lighter. Not because life becomes easier, but because they stop fighting what cannot be avoided. When life wants to move you, you move. When life wants you to rest, you rest. When life asks you to release, you release. And in not resisting, you discover a new kind of strength, not the strength of control, but of harmony. This is the clearest sign of Step 15. The flow becomes the language. In that flow, Michael felt a peace he had never known. Not peace because life was perfect, but peace because he was no longer shaken by everything around him. The flow is the state in which you feel you are going in the right direction, even without knowing the destination. It is where the soul leads and the ego steps back. And now the question of part 7 is here for you to turn inward. Are you swimming against the flow? Is there something in your life you keep holding even though it no longer belongs to you? Is there a direction you fear stepping into even though your soul keeps pulling you there? And most importantly, when you release what you know, do you trust that life will lead you toward what you need? Thank you for opening your heart and walking this journey from within. Part 8, Dark Night of the Soul, and the emptiness that leads to rebirth. Step 16 is always the doorway the seeker does not want to cross. Yet it is the doorway every maturing soul must pass through at least once. It is not the pain of the body or the loss of outer things. It is the kind of ache that feels like something inside you is collapsing in silence. The ancients called it the dark night of the soul. Jesus entered that moment in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Michael stepped into it on a night that seemed as ordinary as any other. He was driving home along the same familiar road when he suddenly felt a vast emptiness so deep he no longer knew what to hold on to. No motivation, no desire, no answer. Even the things that once brought joy seemed to lose their meaning. He pulled his car to the side of the road, turned off the engine, and simply sat there, not crying, not panicking, but feeling a quiet dissolving spreading through his being. This is step 16, when the last remaining pieces of the old ego begin to fall. What many do not understand is that this dark night does not come to destroy you, it comes to remove what no longer belongs to you. As Michael sat in the silent car, he felt something very deep inside, speaking without words. I cannot continue to be who I was, not because he wanted to change, but because he could no longer not change. And in that exhausted moment, a gentle yet profound surrender occurred. He did not try to be strong. He did not try to find solutions. He simply whispered in his heart 3 words, I let go. This is the essence of step 16. Surrender without hopelessness. Release without collapse. When the human part lets go, the soul begins to lead. After step 16, step 17 opens like a strange, empty space that is hard to describe. The old identities are gone. The old motivations are gone. The old need to prove anything is gone. Michael described this phase as becoming an empty house that has just been cleared, all the familiar furniture removed. Yet because it is empty, something new can finally enter. Step 17 is the stage of deep inner emptiness. One morning upon waking, he realized he no longer felt the need to chase anything, no need to make anyone happy, no need to perform, no need to hurry to prove himself. It was as if his heart was learning a new rhythm, slower and more true. This is the quiet reshaping of the inner world that takes place after collapse. No one teaches it. It unfolds by itself once the old has been released. And this time he noticed that old sadness was no longer sharp, old expectations no longer heavy, old fears beginning to fade. This emptiness is not loss. It is the preparation of the soul for a new form. When there is nothing left to cling to, we finally cling to the divine within. Step 18 arrives like dawn after a long night, not dramatic, not loud, but unmistakably clear. It is the moment the soul begins to sense the sacred presence that has always been there. One afternoon, sitting on the front steps, watching the last light of day fall across the street, Michael felt a gentle warmth spreading through his chest, not excitement, not sudden joy, but a peace so deep he felt held from within. He realized he was not alone, had never been alone. He understood there was a presence very soft and very quiet that had been with him all along and had never left. Step 18 is the birth of the Christ within each person, not an outer miracle, but the awakening of the divine nature that has slept for so long. When step 18 opens, a person does not become perfect. They become genuine. They do not become strong in the old way. They begin to shine from the inside, and they do not need to prove it with words, only by living. Before leaving this part, I want to offer you one simple and deep reflection. If you are passing through a season of emptiness, perhaps it is not an ending, but a preparation for a new you being born. And if you soften for just one breath in this moment, Notice what feels as if it is opening inside you right now. Thank you for walking this far with the deepest version of yourself. Part 9. The heart becomes the center, and peace becomes the nature. Step 19 unfolds as a quiet but profound turning. If step 16 was dissolution, step 17 emptiness, step 18 inner rebirth, then step 19 is the moment when the heart becomes the center of one's existence. No longer led by fear or old patterns, no longer pulled by the expectations of others, no longer living to avoid pain or to chase love. In this step, a person begins to live from the original heart. The first thing Michael noticed was the softening of his soul. One morning, while walking through the small park near his home, he saw a child learning to walk. Every time the child fell, it laughed. Every time it stood up, its eyes shone like a tiny sun. Michael stood there longer than he expected. A warm sting rose behind his nose, and he did not understand why something so simple moved him so deeply. Yet the feeling was not sadness. It was the sign of a heart opening. Step 19 always carries this quality. The heart begins to sense the world, not through wounds, but through presence. Jesus, even while carrying a great mission, allowed his heart to tremble with the pain and joy of others. He cried, he embraced, he listened, not because he was weak, but because the heart is the instrument of the divine. When this step opened for Michael, he no longer saw sensitivity as a flaw. He realized that an open heart is true strength, because it lets him see everything with authenticity rather than defense. After step 19, step 20 arrives like a gentle, warm breeze. It does not come with excitement, but with a soft return to the soul's original peace. One quiet evening, while reading in his living room, Michael suddenly realized something unusual. Throughout the entire day, he had not worried as he used to. He did not fear the future, did not criticize himself, did not feel the urge to control anything. He simply lived, breathed, existed, without effort, without tension. A warm calm spread across his chest like a slow-flowing inner river. This is the sign of step 20. Peace no longer coming from external stability, but from the union of the new self with the soul. True peace is not the absence of waves. True peace is the ability to remain unmoved when the waves come. Step 20 makes a person steady as earth without hardness, soft as water without weakness. In that moment, Michael understood that peace is not something to seek. It is something revealed when we stop fighting ourselves. Jesus lived in this state when he stood calm in the storm and when he faced betrayal without hatred. He did not achieve peace from the outside. He was peace. When step 20 sinks deeply into one's life, a person begins to experience what spiritual teachers have spoken of for centuries, the state of no longer seeking, not because everything has been obtained, but because fullness no longer depends on the outer world. It arises from an inner union. Michael began living more simply. He drank water with gratitude. He walked with slowness. He worked not from fear of failure, but from the feeling of contributing. Nothing in his outer world changed dramatically. Yet the way he experienced his world changed completely. He no longer waited for life to be different so he could be at peace. He brought peace into life and saw everything through new eyes. And in this stage, he finally understood something he had never touched before. Peace is a state of the soul, not a reward for effort. Before leaving part 9, take a moment and ask yourself slowly, are you living from the heart or from fear? And if you place your hand on your chest right now, what do you feel? Somewhere within you, there is a place longing to rest without needing a reason. And perhaps the next part of this journey is the invitation for you to step into that place of peace. Thank you for being here with the honesty of your own heart. Part 10, Unconditional Love and the Natural Service of the Soul. Step 21 always appears as a movement that is quiet yet powerful within a person. No longer a love based on being returned. No longer loving to be loved. No longer loving out of fear of losing, but a love that rises naturally like breath. When Michael entered this stage, the first thing he noticed was that his heart opened in a way he had never known before, not because of happiness, but because of understanding. One evening, while standing in line at the grocery store, he saw a young woman struggling to count every small coin. The little child beside her wore a faded jacket. The woman tried to smile, but her eyes were tired and hesitant. In the past, Michael might have simply watched, but that night, without thinking, without hesitation, he gently covered the amount she lacked. The woman was so surprised she could not speak. Only her teary eyes expressed gratitude. As Michael left the store, he realized something unusual. Love did not drain him. It made him brighter. Step 21 always works this way. Love freed from need and condition becomes healing energy, not only for the receiver, but for the giver. Jesus lived this kind of love with everyone who came near him, without exclusion, without division, without condition. He did not love because others were worthy. He loved because he was love. And as step 21 opened, Michael began to understand the true meaning of that. From this foundation, step 22 appears naturally. Service becomes a way of living. Not service as sacrifice, but service as the natural response of the soul. Michael noticed that he no longer helped others to be seen as good, not to be praised, not out of obligation. He helped because he understood deeply that another person's pain was not separate from his own. One day at work, a young colleague became overwhelmed with pressure and sat crying in the break room. Michael entered, not to preach or advise. He simply sat beside her, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and said quietly, "Everything will arrange itself in the best way." The young woman became still, not because of the words, but because of the presence. When step 22 opens, presence becomes the gift that heals. People do not need many words, they need a heart that is truly there. Jesus washed the feet of his disciples not to appear humble, but to show that a mature soul always bends down, not to belittle itself, but to lift others. As Michael understood this, he began to live this way without effort. Then step 23 arrives. Presence becomes medicine. People think healing is a skill, but for those who reach this depth, healing does not lie in action, but in vibration. One weekend evening, Michael visited his close friend Daniel, who was going through a collapsing marriage. Daniel spoke little, sat long, and sometimes only sighed. Michael did not search for solutions or push comforting words. He simply sat with Daniel in respectful silence. After a while, Daniel broke down and whispered, "Thank you for not making me be strong." In that moment, Michael realized that when a person is present with their heart, they become a healing force. This is the essence of step 23. Spiritual maturity heals not with hands, but with authenticity. No need for great words or dramatic acts. Full presence is enough to dry a tear. Before closing part 10, I want to ask you something so you can reflect on how you have loved and how you have shown up. Are you loving with an open heart or with old conditions? When someone needs you, are you truly present or is your mind elsewhere? And more importantly, if you gently open your heart right now, do you feel you are lacking love or overflowing with love? You have not yet known how to give. Thank you for listening with the deepest part of your soul. Part 11, Universal Love and the Consecration of Life. Step 24 opens like a vibration that human language can hardly describe. No longer a love between one person and another, no longer a feeling directed toward a particular figure, but a dissolving into life itself. One morning, as Michael sat by the window with the first light pouring into the room, he would normally get up and prepare for the day. Yet that morning he remained still, simply watching tiny dust particles float in the sunlight. A very ordinary scene, but his heart opened in a quiet and gentle way. He felt grateful for the light, grateful for breath, grateful that life continued, even though he had fallen so many times. No reason, no special event, yet love rose like water, filling a cup that had been empty for years. This is the essence of step 24. Love becomes the lens of the soul. When Jesus said, "Whatever you do for one of the least of these, you do for me," he was not speaking of morality. He was describing the experience of unified consciousness where every form of life is an expression of the divine. In that moment, Michael understood he did not only love people, he loved existence. He loved every moment. He loved even the mistakes that brought him here. This is what people call universal love, a love that needs no reason to exist. When this vibration becomes steady, step 25 opens like a silent vow, the consecration of life. This is not a dramatic promise. It needs no ceremony, no declaration, no written pledge. It is the deep knowing that life no longer belongs to the small self. It belongs to the truth within. One day, as Michael was helping distribute meals to the homeless through a local church program, he realized something very clear. He was not doing it to feel good or to balance guilt. He was doing it because his heart naturally led him there. When he looked into the eyes of an elderly man receiving the meal, Michael felt a sacredness greater than any religious ritual he had ever attended, because in that moment he understood the essence of step 25. Life becomes a ritual. Every action becomes a prayer. Every moment becomes an altar. Jesus did not perform sacred acts only inside temples. He did sacred acts when touching the sick, when sitting with the forgotten, when seeing others with a gaze free of judgment. When step 25 opens, a person begins to live in that way, not trying to be holy, but acting naturally from a deep inner sacredness. This is where many misunderstand. They believe consecrating life means abandoning the world, but actually step 25 brings a person back into the world with clearer and lighter presence. Michael began doing everything with deep respect for life, from the way he spoke, the way he listened, the way he treated the server at a restaurant, to the way he cared for his own body. No pressure, no ideals, only an authenticity that guided each action. Before closing part 11, I want to ask you something so you can look honestly into yourself. If there is one thing in your life that needs to be consecrated, what do you think it is? Maybe your heart, maybe a relationship, maybe your silence, or perhaps your entire life. And if you place your hand on your chest right now, what do you feel is asking to live more truthfully? Thank you for journeying this far into the deepest part of your heart. As part 12, the gate of enlightenment and the final dissolving of the self, step 26 arrives like a very gentle breeze that quietly changes the entire inner space of a person, not as a flash of light, not as a spiritual thunder, but as a soft shift that makes one realize the world is no longer outside oneself. One afternoon, Michael was sitting in the familiar park watching children play as their laughter filled the air, and in that moment something far beyond ordinary understanding happened. He felt the world was not in front of him. It was inside him, not as an idea, but as a direct experience. Every sound, every movement, every image blended into a single essence. He no longer felt like an observer separated from life. He was the unfolding itself. This is the essence of step 26, the union of the human and the divine. When Jesus said, "I and the Father are one," he was describing this level of awareness. There is no distance, no separation, no one left to follow, nothing left to achieve. Everything returns to one luminous stillness. When this door opens, step 27 begins a deeper dissolving of the old identity. This is not the painful dissolving of step 16. It is the dissolving of every concept about oneself. One morning, while looking into the mirror, Michael no longer felt what he used to feel. He no longer saw a man carrying old wounds. He no longer saw a warrior pushing through life. He no longer saw a role, an expectation, or a story. He saw something very simple, life looking back at itself. This feeling was not pride. It was so humble that it made his eyes well up. He realized he did not own his life. He was simply being lived. With this realization, the self had nowhere to cling. Thoughts like, "I am better," I am worse, I am right, I am wrong, slipped away like foam losing its shape. Michael began living with no one to defend, no identity to maintain, no past to carry. He did not become someone new. He returned to what he always was, formless, storyless, limitless. When these two layers become stable, step 28 opens like the widest door. The whole universe becomes a single body in the seeker's experience. One early morning, before the sun had risen, Michael sat by the window watching the first rays of light touch the clouds. He felt that light not only shining upon the world, but shining through him. He sensed the connection between his breath and the pulse of life itself. There were not two currents, only one. He felt the wind as if he were the wind. He heard the birds as if he were the song. He watched the world move as if it were the natural rhythm of his own heart. This is what every religion and spiritual tradition describes, but few ever experience, the oneness of the universe. Jesus said the kingdom of God is within you. Step 28 shows this truth not through words, but through direct union. In this stage, Michael no longer felt the need to change his life. He felt life changing through him. There was no idea of I am practicing, no question of am I enlightened, no desire to reach a spiritual goal. All of that dissolved like morning mist. What remained was pure presence, and in that presence wisdom became so clear it needed no effort. Actions happened at the right moment. Words came from a deep place without mistake. Decisions rose from stillness without fear. There was no one orchestrating, only life moving through an open vessel. Before closing part 12, I want to ask you something so you can shine this light inward. In the moments when you have felt yourself dissolve into life, even for just an instant, have you sensed that your true nature has never been separate from this world? And if you place your hand on your chest right now, do you feel a place within you wanting to merge with the larger flow of life? Thank you for being here with your open and spacious heart. Part 13, the union of heaven and earth in daily life. Step 29 opens as a stage where awakening is no longer a passing moment in meditation, but becomes the very substance woven into every small action of daily life. This is the moment when the sacred and the ordinary merge, no longer separated by any boundary. For Michael, this shift arrived on a morning that seemed as ordinary as any other. He turned on the faucet to wash his face. Cold water touched his hands. Light from the window fell across the sink, and somehow a deep feeling rose within him, the feeling that no moment is ordinary. Every action, no matter how small, was taking place inside a sacred space. He watched a drop of water slide from his fingers, and instead of rushing, he waited and watched it fall. Each drop felt like a breath of existence. This is the essence of step 29, applying awakening to every moment of daily life. No mountain peaks needed, no temple halls, no perfect silence. Flowing water, moving wind, the glow of a street light on a table, everything becomes a teaching. After his resurrection, Jesus did not appear with thunder or blinding light. He appeared through simplicity, through the breaking of bread, through the gentle calling of a name, through breath blending into the wind. It shows that at this step the seeker no longer separates the worlds. The sacred is simply the ordinary seen with clear eyes. At this stage, Michael realized he no longer needed to try to maintain a spiritual state. He noticed he no longer searched for anything. He no longer felt torn between wanting awakening and fearing he might lose it. He no longer worried about falling back a level. Instead, he simply lived, simply breathed, simply showed up in each pulse of life. And the strange thing was that this simplicity opened a deeper vibration than any mystical experience he had before. He found he could wash dishes with presence. He could open the car door with gratitude. He could listen to someone with a heart empty like a clear page. He could walk through the rain without complaint. This is the mark of awareness that no longer wants to change life but wants to merge with it. In step 29, the seeker no longer lives by what he thinks, but by what he knows from the depth of the soul. And this is the moment he understands that the whole journey was never about escaping life. It was about returning to life with new eyes. From this foundation, step 30 begins to reveal itself as the dissolving of even the concept of awakening. One quiet night, lying in his room, Michael looked at the ceiling and felt something very profound, that there was no boundary between who he was and the movement of life outside. No boundary between subject and object. No framework left to name the experience. He felt himself melting into space as though presence had become without shape. The idea of I did not disappear through fear or force. It dissolved through softness, the softness of a leaf falling at the right moment, the softness of light touching the wall. He did not faint. He did not enter a trance. He simply became deeply silent. This is the essence of step 30, the dissolving of the last spiritual self. This step does not bring excitement. It brings a deep silence, a silence in which the seeker realizes he was never the seeker. Every question that once caused pain fades like smoke. Every explanation that once imprisoned him becomes light as a breeze. And in this dissolving, Michael understood that awakening is not a destination to reach. It is the place he always was, hidden only by layers of self. Before closing part 13, I want to ask you a quiet and deep question. When you look at your own daily life, is there a moment you once rushed past that could have been your spiritual doorway? And if you look at your hands right now, can you feel that the life flowing inside them has always been sacred and has never left you for even a moment? Thank you for listening with the eyes of your soul. Part 14, the dissolving of the illusion of enlightenment and the final surrender. Step 31 never arrives through sudden brightness, but through a silence so deep that the person experiencing it can no longer tell the difference between living and being lived. For Michael, this moment unfolded on a night that looked entirely ordinary. He sat at the edge of his bed, the room dim with a soft yellow light, the faint sound of cars passing outside, the cool air of the night brushing his skin. But inside that simplicity, something strange happened. He felt as if an invisible hand reached into his chest and lifted out a weight he had carried for a lifetime. Not pain, not fear, but the need to become someone, the need to achieve a spiritual state he once called enlightenment. Step 31 always carries this teaching. Enlightenment cannot be attained. It can only be received when the one who wants it disappears. In that moment, Michael felt an absolute surrender. No more effort, no more searching, no more holding on to spiritual ideas. He realized that what held him all this time was not the crude ego, but the subtle ego wearing a spiritual mask. The ego that wants to awaken, the ego that wants to be special, the ego that wants to be recognized as awakened. When he saw this clearly, every inner structure collapsed into dust. He whispered one small sentence inside himself, carrying the weight of a lifetime of resistance: I return everything. And in that surrender, a lightness, almost weightless, spread through his whole being. This is the essence of step 31, returning the soul to the source without keeping any part of the self for protection. After the subtle ego dissolved, step 32 opened like a gentle doorway into a state where the separation between the body and the divine no longer existed. No bright light, no physical transformation, no mystical phenomenon. Only a deep simplicity. One morning, Michael opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The sky was clear. Cold air brushed his face. Birds sang more clearly than usual. Nothing special in the scene, yet something completely different awakened inside him, as though he was seeing the world through the eyes of the world itself. He no longer felt, I am living my life. That feeling shifted into life is living through me. He walked down the steps, and each footstep seemed to melt into the ground. No boundaries, no sense of I moving, only one movement of life happening. This is the nature of step 32. Not I am present, but presence is using this body as a point of expression. After his resurrection, Jesus appeared and disappeared like breath, not to perform miracles, but because he was no longer bound by the limits of ego. He existed as pure life. In step 32, Michael understood this truth, not through thought, but through direct experience. He no longer practiced presence, He was presence. He no longer tried to love. He was love. He no longer sought peace. He was peace. When these two layers settled, step 33 unfolded like a final dawn and also a first dawn. No music, no strange light, no mystical event. Only the pure simplicity that the seeker spends a lifetime returning to. One afternoon, while washing a glass cup in the kitchen sink, water flowed across his hands and sunlight shimmered on the surface. Suddenly a truth rose within him so profound no words could hold it. I have never been separate from anything. He stopped, his hands still wet, water still flowing, but time dissolved. No past, no future, no story of Michael, no need to understand, no need to become, only a pristine presence, silent and complete. This is step 33, the full union of human and divine within ordinary life. Michael began to see that washing a cup is as sacred as a prayer. A glance is as sacred as a ritual. A breath is as sacred as a hymn. After becoming pure light, Jesus returned to the world not to shine, but to dissolve that light into everyday moments. No one recognized him because he no longer needed to be recognized. This is the nature of step 33. Those who reach union do not wish to be seen as awakened. They simply live, and that life becomes the light. Before closing part 14, I want to ask you a deep question for your own journey. If one day you no longer need to become someone, you no longer need to achieve anything, you no longer need to search for answers, what do you think will arise within you? And if you place your hand on your heart right now, can you feel a part of you ready to let go of an old layer to step into your own clear and radiant self? Thank you for walking all the way to this depth with the courage of your soul. Part 15. Living as a quiet light in the middle of the ordinary world. Step 34 does not appear as a new event. It feels like the echo of the union from step 33, spreading into every small corner of life. It is not another level of awakening, but the natural maturation of inner light as it begins to infuse every interaction, every decision, every breath. For Michael, this step revealed itself in the most ordinary moments. One morning, while standing in line at the supermarket, an older man ahead of him fumbled and dropped his wallet. In the past, Michael might have felt annoyed because he was running late for work. But now he looked at the man with gentle eyes. He bent down, picked up the wallet, and said softly, "Take your time." That sentence was not an effort to be kind. It was the natural response of a heart that is opened. Step 34 always carries this feeling. The right action comes without calculation. Kindness is not a trained virtue. It rises like spring water when the ego no longer controls. When this step settled, Michael noticed he no longer used words or logic to comfort anyone. He was present, and that presence became a space where others could finally breathe. One day, his neighbor Emily knocked on his door with red eyes. Her husband had just lost his job, and the whole family was overwhelmed. In the past, Michael might have tried to give advice, but now he simply made her a warm cup of tea, placed it in front of her, and sat beside her. No questions, no attempts to solve anything, just sitting. And in those minutes of silence, Emily broke down in tears, as if she had finally found a place to put down the weight she had carried for too long. Step 34 carries a unique form of healing that does not come from action, but from presence. This is what Jesus did when he simply looked at someone in pain and they felt seen, understood, loved, without any teaching. Step 34 also allows the seeker to live with natural wisdom without trying to be wise. One afternoon, Michael sat in his usual cafe. A young man at the next table sighed and told his mother on the phone that he was a failure, that his life was going nowhere. When he ended the call and sat in defeat, Michael turned slightly and asked one simple question: "Are you all right?" The question was ordinary, but carried a sincerity that opened the young man's heart. Words poured out of him. Michael did not give a lecture. He simply said one quiet sentence coming from the depth of the soul: "You are not failing. You are shedding an old skin." The young man fell silent, then nodded, as if someone had reignited a light he thought was gone. This is the essence of step 34. The seeker's inner light becomes a guide for others without any effort to shine. And the most important part of this step is humility. Those who reach step 34 never see themselves as awakened. They do not see themselves as above anyone. They do not feel special. The greater the light, the deeper the humility. Michael still went to work, still washed dishes, still took out the trash, still laughed at small jokes, but everything in him felt lighter, not because he escaped life, but because he no longer carried the old weight of ego. He did not try to become light, but his simplicity made people feel something clear, true, warm, and that is the essence of step 34, living as a quiet light, not radiant or showy, but present wherever someone needs it. Before closing part 15, I want to ask you a gentle but deep question. If today you could become a small light for someone who is tired, what would you choose to do? One sentence, one glance, one small act can soften an entire day for someone. And if you place your hand on your heart right now, can you feel that you too deserve that same softness? Thank you for your quiet and sincere presence. Part 16. Returning to wholeness and living fully in true light. Step 35 is no longer a path of climbing upward, but a path of returning. No more mountains to ascend, no more layers to dig through, no more struggles to overcome. This is the moment when a person comes back to ordinary life with clear eyes, an open heart, and an awakened soul. For Michael, this step did not arrive through a grand moment. It arrived on a peaceful morning. He woke up to sunlight slipping through the curtains and birds singing softly outside. There was no excitement, no radiance, only a clear inner knowing that he was no longer searching for anything, no longer trying to become someone, no longer working to maintain peace. Peace had become his natural breath. This is the essence of step 35, the return to one's original nature without effort. One afternoon, Michael walked along the familiar road leading home. Each step touched the ground with gentleness and gratitude. He watched leaves falling, listened to the wind passing through the trees, and sensed everything as if all of it was singing the same song in which he was a part. There was no boundary between him and life. No more I observed the world, only life unfolding through him. He smiled at an elderly woman sitting on a bench. She smiled back. No words were needed. But within that exchange, Michael felt a deep, wordless connection. This is the sign of step 35. Presence becomes a way of living. Every interaction is light. Every moment has depth. And from here, life is no longer a lesson. It becomes grace. In this stage, Michael realized that what he once considered spiritual work had now blended into everything he did. Working, cooking, answering emails, cleaning the house, all of it flowed from awareness. He did not do anything with the aim of staying awake. He simply lived. And because of that, life became incredibly clear. He used fewer words. He listened more. He loved more naturally. Not because he tried, but because he could no longer be any other way. Jesus, after reaching full union, lived exactly like this. He did not stand on mountaintops to announce wisdom. He walked among people in complete humility. True light does not separate the one who carries it from life. It merges them into life in a way that has never existed before. More importantly, step 35 marks the point where a person sees the world through truth rather than memory. Michael no longer identified with the past. Old wounds no longer hurt. Old mistakes no longer weighed on him. Old losses no longer created emptiness. They became doors that opened and brought him to this present point. And this present point was so complete that he would not trade it for anything. He no longer sought wholeness. He lived from it. He no longer sought love. He was love. He no longer sought peace. He was peace. This is the state that every spiritual tradition calls living in the light. Not mystical light, but the simple light of truth. Step 35 also brought a quiet maturity. Michael became calmer without sadness, more silent without distance, caring without attachment. He lived as if every day was a gift, with no past pulling him back and no future pulling him forward. People around him sensed the shift not because he spoke about it, but because being near him made them feel steady. And this is how a mature soul expands its light, not through teachings, but through presence. Before closing part 16, I want to ask you a gentle but deep question. Has there been a moment recently when you felt ready to release an old part of yourself in order to live more truthfully? And if you close your eyes for one breath right now, can you hear the soft call of your soul asking you to return to yourself? Thank you for walking this entire journey with such honesty.